Welcome to the Mark J. Ryan Experience with your host, Mark J. Ryan, mind-body expert with over 25 years experience in NLP, hypnosis, and coaching, taking you on the road to self-discovery, exploring different parts of yourself, including spirituality, the latest research into the brain and the mind, and how it can help you attain more of what you want. Get ready to change your life for the better with the Mark J. Ryan Experience.
Hey everybody, it's Mark J. Ryan, and thanks for being here. I got a really big gift and surprise for you today. I'm going to be doing an interview. As a matter of fact, I just got done with the interview, and I'm going to do this to put this on the front with one of my top two mentors in life, and that's Dr. John Burton. And Dr. John Burton has been instrumental since around the year 2000. I've gone to see his seminars. I've read all four of his books. Today we're going to talk a little bit about his newest book and how powerful this is, The Sacred Sequence, Remembering the One Truth. And he's been a great friend, therapist. He's helped me. Some of his metaphors and stories and ideas are in my products. And recently I started talking to John again after this new book came out last summer, and I started talking to him in November. And I got to tell you, man, this is really good stuff. It's a 110-page book. It's fairly thin. And I told my wife I'm going to go out and I'll get it done in about an afternoon, maybe a couple days. And I got about 10 pages done after 4 or 5 hours of reading. It was just blowing my mind. And so some of the material in this interview that you're going to listen to, if it's new to you, it may seem complicated, but it's worth it to go through it. I mean, the book, John's selling the book for like $10.95 plus $3 shipping. Overseas is going to be more, but you got to get this book. If you're interested in self-help at all, if you're interested in spirituality, if you're a therapist or a coach, you got to get that. It's like the Rosetta Stone. This book is a key. It's unbelievable. I describe it as like trying to put a puzzle together for years, and but you don't know what it's supposed to be, and then somebody hands you the cover to the puzzle, and you say, oh, now I get it. Now I know why I was doing this. And now I know this should actually be over here, and this should be down here, and I should put it starts to make sense of what's going on. And I'll tell you, just reading the book, you'll get a shift. But what I do here today is I interviewed Dr. Burton, and it was going to be about an hour. And I think we got about an hour and 10 minutes out of it, maybe an hour and 15 minutes out of it, where we go over the ideas. And I show how I've been using it with myself. And, a lot of his ideas, he's got 3 other books that came, one especially Equilibrium. I got a lot of great ideas from that. And I've since gone back about halfway through Equilibrium now and now all this makes so much sense. And if you've ever wondered, why do I do this? Why do I want to shift and why do I want to change and something stops me? That's what this book is about. It tells you not only what stops you, but helps you identify what can help you and get you back on track, what you've lost, what you've been missing since all those times, and why they go missing. That's what we deal with in this interview. It's a great interview. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend you get the book. We're also throwing in a bonus. John and I did a product back in the early 2000s called Total and Permanent Freedom in 3 Easy Steps. And it was an interview, about a 40-minute interview, and then he does about a 30-minute induction, trance, and meditation, where you just close your eyes and go in and let him do the meditation. That's coming free. So you're buying a $10.95 book, $3 shipping. If you're overseas, it's going to be a little bit more, but I think we sold the product for $29 at one time, and then I think we went down to maybe 24 on sale or 19 on sale. So you're getting that included with it too. Is you just got to mail him an email address once you buy it. Say, hey, I bought it. I want to get the download with it for free. But watch this interview. Enjoy this interview. Let it sink in. If you don't get it the first time, that's fine. Go back and watch it and listen to it again. There will be some magic that happens when you start to get this and understand this. There's a deep inner knowing when you hear this stuff or read the stuff in the book where you go, oh, that's what that is. And that's why it took me so long to read that book. It took me almost 3 weeks to read that book because I kept having an aha experience, and I just have to sit there and meditate and go, oh, and then my brain would start going, so that's why this happened. And then I go back and read a little bit more, and it happened again. And then I have to wait a day or two, sometimes 3 days, before I went back and read some more of the book because I got so much out of it. And then I started using it I get great success with my clients, my coaching clients, and I started using it with my clients. and they experienced the shift as well. So they were getting great results, and now we were getting on a whole different level of results. I don't know how to describe it. You're just going to have to experience it yourself, or come to a coaching session and we'll take you through it. But it gives you a better understanding that a lot of your problems and why you do things in life are not about you. They're just patterns and processes that are going on inside of you. And this book in our interview teaches you how to go in there and identify some of this stuff, and then kind of separate it away and saying, that's not me, that's just a pattern I do. But then what do we do with it? That's the magic. So watch the interview, watch it again and again if you can. Order the book if you get a chance, and get the download and listen to Total and Permanent Freedom in 3 Easy Steps. John Burton is amazing, and you'll see why I've been following him for all these years. And have fun with it. Enjoy. Here's Dr. John Burton and myself in an interview we just completed a little bit ago. And write me, give me some feedback too. I'd love to hear what you think about it, and if you want more of these interviews, because I've got some other people lined up if you want some more. All right, take care. Thanks. It's Mark J. Ryan. Enjoy the interview. Hey everybody, this is Mark J. Ryan, and I'm here in lovely Mount Shasta, California, talking to my good friend and mentor, Dr. John Burton in Greenville, South Carolina. Is that right, John? Greenville,
yes, it
South
is.
Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
So welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about John's brand new book, which I have right here. We'll put it up on the screen a little bit. The Sacred Sequence, Remembering the One Truth. And I've been working with John for many, many years as a friend, and he's been my coach and therapist for years. And I've also attended some of his seminars, read his books, and we've got a friendship where we talk a lot about therapy and coaching and how the mind works and childhood development. And John's an expert on childhood development, which we'll get into here in just a minute. I'll give him a formal introduction. But I just want to say hi to John and talk a little bit about his book today. But anyways, Dr. John Burton, thanks for coming on the show and talking.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to talking a little bit about your book today.
Yeah, very much looking forward to talking with you, Mark. And I've appreciated our friendship and fun explorings over the years and discoveries. It's been really enriching.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. I'm going to give you a formal introduction here. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. John Burton. Dr. John Burton, besides being a good friend and a mentor to me, he is a licensed counselor and supervisor right now working in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina. He has 35 years of counseling experience. I remember one time we talked and John had said something about he had over 20,000 hours. I don't know what it is now of client time. You might want to correct me on that. He has a doctorate in human development counseling and is certified as a clinical hypnotherapist as well as a Reiki master. Dr. Burton maintains a private practice, as we said, in Greenville, South Carolina, where he provides counseling and conducts workshops on personal and spiritual growth. One of the things we'll talk about today is his new book. He has 4 books, and we'll put a picture up showing all 4 of the different books that he has, which are just amazing. Some of the best books I've ever read. The Sacred Sequence, which is his most recent book, Remembering the One Truth, has to be one of the 3 best books I've ever read. It is incredible. It was a 10-page book, and I told my wife I'm going to go out and read this book. I figured I'd have it done in an afternoon, but about 3 weeks later, I'd say 3 weeks later, I finally had the book done. I'd go out and start reading the book and say, oh my gosh, the first day I was out there, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, I got 10 pages done maybe. And the second time I went out there, I had to wait a couple days to just integrate all these different ideas. And then the second day I went out there to read, again, same thing. I got about 10 more pages done, and then I had to take a couple days off just to integrate. This book is so powerful. And John, I remember talking to you a little bit about this book and saying, I can't believe how deep the concepts are and how powerful the concepts are in this book, and why. And you kind of laughed and you said, because we were talking along the years of while you were writing this book, and you said, now you see why it took me so long to write this book, to get the concepts down.
Yeah, it took me years to write this, to understand the concepts enough to be able to actually convey it in a way and somebody else can understand it.
Yeah.
It was interesting, complex journey that taught me a lot along the way that I was able to then share with others.
Yeah. So why don't you, if you can, tell me and the listeners a little bit about why you wrote this book, how it came about, and why you spent so much time and energy into it, and put so much spirit into this, because this incorporates a lot of what was in your other 3 books, especially Equilibrium, which is again one of my favorite books in the world, and it incorporated all these different things together. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how the culmination of this came together, John?
Sure, thanks. I can trace the roots of this book back about, probably close to 14 years. It was really a gift from Spirit. It was a dream I had one night that gave me what became, I called the sacred sequence, which is faith, hope, love, charity, applied toward God, self, others, and the universe in that particular order. And it was told to me just like that in a dream that I had from what I was convinced was one of my spirit guides, who has been a regular presence in my dreams over the years. And so I knew that was an important concept or set of concepts, but I didn't quite know what to do with that. It was just like knowing that that's powerful and significant. And so it sort of left me with like the end point, and I had to go back and start a process where I could gradually fill in the blanks to catch up to what was given to me as sort of the conclusion. So they gave me the end, and I had to start at the beginning. And in the process of working with clients, I began to recognize that I call it primitive brain in the book. It has a lot of aliases, from ego to limbic system, all kinds of left brain, all kinds of aliases. But I realized that in the process of working with clients, that when we are traumatized, we've all been traumatized multiple times in our lives, childhood and even in adulthood. And so when we are traumatized, it activates our primitive brain, which has a certain style of looking at life and looking at self, and it sets us in motion of an external orientation that then endows certain pivotal people in our life, powerful people in our life. It endows them with life-giving or life-taking power. And so we then try to seek sort of reconciliation with them or gain a sense of worthiness through their reapproaching us with an acceptance or an approval. So we go seeking approval and acceptance through our life, though we never really lost it. It's just that our primitive brain thinks we did. And so we then start trying to find ways to reconcile that and to fix the wound, when the wound is actually an illusion, because it's created in a way by the ego self. So what happens is we start looking for that solution, that answer outside of ourselves instead of going within. And we make somebody or something our source for love worthiness. And at that point, we never do find it, because it becomes sort of an addictive process. We search in anything from purchasing things to status to power over others to eating disorders. It just covers the gamut, and they're all sort of forms of addiction that give us a little bit of a fix, but never the real deal, because it's an external source, not an internal source. And so in the process of this faith, hope, love, charity toward God, self, others, and the universe, I realize that there's a certain order that needs to happen for greater well-being within ourselves. And that is that we start with connecting with God, or whatever term or word you wish to use for that source, that one origin of all things. And when we're in the presence of that, in that sort of consciousness, we recognize that we have an inherent love worthiness that cannot be increased or decreased, can never be taken away. So then we receive that truth to ourselves, which I call the one truth, and then we distribute that out to others and into the world in general, such be it our relationship with nature or animals. So it comes from God or source to self, and then out to others, and then to the world at large. And in the process, we find that raising consciousness in various methods allows us to access what some would call Christ consciousness or God unity, or that sort of thing of higher consciousness, which then allows us to reconfigure the perspective on these wounds and gain freedom from them and resolve and release them, so that we are free to be who we really are on the inside. I like to sort of lightly say that, who is it you are becoming that you already are? Because truly we already are this being we're trying to become. It's a matter of getting the obstacles and illusions out of the way so that we can live from here and express this into our lives.
Yeah, that was great. And I'm sure the listeners are going to get how much, you say that in a simple way and how much is packed in there. It's amazing. And one of the things when I was reading this book, I contacted you. It had been a little bit since I had talked to you, and I'm reading this book, and I said, I want to experience this. I kind of remember us going through different coaching, and you were, while you were in the development phases of this, playing a little bit with this. But as I read the beginning and understood so much more about the primitive brain and how it works, and this is what I do for a living when I'm coaching and everything, but the way you did it was so concise. It was kind of like a key, or I explained to you like a puzzle top to a box, like I'd been putting together a puzzle and I had different pieces all over put together, but I didn't really know what I was building, so I could see different corners of the puzzle or parts. But if you're going to put something together, you want to see the box to it and the top right. to it. And that's what I started getting from this. So what I want to do is kind of go back a little bit and unpack what you just said and some of the things that were in the book. A big one for me, and you use NLP, you use hypnosis, you use neurosemantics, you use a lot of different things. Yes. But to me, I think the foundation and the base that you had is your doctorate in human development, but also childhood development. One of the things right. with NLP that I used to say all the time, I'd ask people, well, how did this get here? And then NLP people a lot of times would say to me, don't worry about how it got here. Just use the NLP stuff to help. Well, I did. I kept using the NLP to help and the hypnosis to help, but I had this drive to find out what causes this. Where is this coming from? How do we develop and generate these things? And so that's when I got into your work, I'm like, oh, here it is. And now with the book, the understanding is how this childhood stuff puts things together and how we form the world. And then using the sacred sequence to help kind of put it back together or bring back the wholeness. One of the big things that got me, and that maybe you can explain a little bit to the listeners, is trauma. Because I always thought trauma was going to be like a car accident or something, which it is, and something major. But from what I got from your book that was new, was that traumas can be little things that still can put you and drive you down into the primitive brain and cause different issues. So can you explain to us a little bit about trauma, what it is, and kind of the dynamics of how it works in each individual, so maybe they can understand from a personal point of view?
Absolutely, be glad to. So what I refer to trauma as is a response to an event, not the event itself. But the primitive brain has such an external focus that it gets locked onto and attaches to the event itself, which then disempowers the individual so that event holds all power over me. And so what we do is to recognize that one is there are also types of trauma. There's direct trauma, which is what I experience if somebody is abusive to me in some form, verbally or emotionally or even physically. And then there's what might be called indirect or vicarious trauma, where we observe somebody else who is being traumatized. So we may not be the direct victim, but because of our compassionate nature as humans, we recognize somebody who's being abused, and we ourselves experience that feeling of trauma. And so our response to trauma is to treat the quality or trait that we're in the midst of expressing as dangerous, because if, for example, I was being assertive with my father and I was 7 years old and I wanted to express my will and assert myself, but if the response was really intense and harsh and I was sort of squashed in some sense for that attempt at assertiveness, I then decide that, one, my father has life and death power over me, and two, assertiveness is dangerous to my survival. So my survival brain or primitive brain kicks in and says, I have to reject that part of myself. It's dangerous to me, so I can't be assertive. And so not only did my father seemingly reject my assertiveness, but now I reject my own personal trait of assertiveness and put it over here. And that's the birth of our shadow self. So then I can either be passive or I can be aggressive, or I can be creative and be passive aggressive. But ultimately we can then either be passive or aggressive depending upon the response we get. So our response to trauma is the problem because it makes us disown a part of ourself. And when we disown that part of ourselves, we are now limited in our collection of resources and responses to situations in this world, in our life. And so the trauma means we've disowned part of ourselves, which means we're then not only did we disown that part of ourselves, but we now feel unworthy because we've been criticized or rejected or in some way felt threatened. And so now we have to figure out how to get back in good graces, even though we never got out of it. But if we use the external source, such as father or some significant other, as our source of well-being and love-worthiness, then I have to figure out how to get somebody else to approve of me or grant me acceptance and a sense of self-worth, instead of that connection with source that tells me it's a constant presence within me that cannot be lost. Does that explain things?
Yeah, it does make sense. And as we had talked when I was reading the book, the idea of losing something, I really didn't get until I put myself into an example. And I remember as a child, I won't go into the extremes of it, but it basically was, I remembered something happening to me, a trauma. Mm-hmm. And I remembered the shift, and I started thinking, well, what did I lose and where did it go?
Yes.
But I also remembered that I was now I was like in a different place. I was almost like a different person, a different identity, working from something. And I'm thinking, well, what did I lose? And I'm like, oh, I lost like a wholeness. I lost this peace that I had, this wholeness that I had. And all of a sudden it was gone. And I was now operating from an unfamiliar place, not knowing what to do, from an unfamiliar part of the brain. I was
Absolutely.
from a lower part of the brain. So, once I think you catch that, or once I caught that, or once the listeners catch what that is and realize that, but then you're saying now we have to go out and we're trying to get back what we lost, but because of what the trauma did, whatever the person maybe in front of us, or could it be other things? We feel like because it's lost and it's gone, that the person now that's in front of us or somebody else took it, and we've got to get it back from that source. Am I correct in that?
Exactly. Sometimes people will say, well, my father took all my confidence, or my mother took my sense of self-esteem, or something like that. And we feel like that's the case, but that's our primitive brain talking, because it believes that all the power resides outside of us. And instead, rather than having it taken from us, we actually hid that from ourselves and from that other person who was dangerous, so that they couldn't take it. But we hid it so well, we don't know where we put it. Now we're looking for it outside of ourselves instead of inside.
Okay, so you're saying that this is something that we did, and the real mistake here, where the sequence gets out of order, is thinking that it's outside, but in a sense that it is inside. And I seem to remember, and I've tried to research it and I can't find out, maybe you'll know where it came from, but I remember hearing a story or reading a story about how I think it was Zeus was the king of the gods, and how Zeus became the king of the gods was that they were trying to figure out where to hide the soul of man, and they looked far and wide, and all these other gods came up with these ideas, but Zeus said, we'll hide it inside of man, because he'll never figure out where it is.
Yeah, perfect.
So we have the idea, and so when it there's a part of the book where you talk about ICS, like alcoholics, foodaholics, or whatever, and you kind of shifted the word foodaholics. But this is then our part of our search, where we end up having some kind of an issue, is not just where we think this is, but how we go about trying to get it back.
Yes. If we feel that we're missing a part of ourselves, for example, assertiveness, and that I've been rejected or disapproved, and therefore my worth has now been diminished in some sense. Now I've got to compensate for that illusion, really, because I think it's an illusion, because our worth can't be diminished, but our ego self thinks it has been. So now I've got to compensate for that illusion that our worth has been diminished. And as a result, then we do what I call the icks. It's if you put ick on the end of alcohol, you have alcohol ick. If I'm addicted to chocolate, then I'm a chocolate ick, not a chocoholic. And so we put ick on the end of it because it implies addiction. And so sometimes if, for example, going back to the assertiveness, if I feel that I didn't get along with somebody, or I objected to someone, and then that caused my trauma, because their reaction was so harsh and punitive, then I've got to figure out how to compensate for that. And the first way I'm going to try to do that is to get along with everybody. So I'm going to be what I call a harmonic. And that's not a fan obsessed with Mark Harmon, but it's somebody who's addicted to harmony. And so they try everything they can to get along with everybody, but nothing will be enough, because no matter how many people you get along with, you still haven't reclaimed that part of self and the self-worth, because it sets up that addictive process where, oh, I got along well with that person today in that hour, but what about the next hour, the next day, the next month, etc. So that we have to keep repeating the process, because it never translates into a steady source of self-worth.
Okay, so we're repeating the process, and that's part of it, only because we don't know any better. But these are also processes from childhood development that we kind of get stuck in. Am I correct? Where
yes.
And you have about 7 or 10 of them in your book Equilibrium that you talk about, and you kind of go through it a little bit with the sacred sequence. But what's happening then is now we're operating from a different. It's almost like. It just came in is imagine flying in a plane and being a pilot for a small engine plane, and then all of a sudden you get put into a 747 with all those different controls, or It could be the other way around. We're flying in a 747, and then all of a sudden we're in a little plane, and that's what we have to operate from. So we're not effective operating from these primitive brain processes, and we're not able to go through the world or see the world in the same way through that as we would through the sacred sequence or the higher self of who we are.
Yes, exactly. So in roughly the first 7 years of life, give or take, we're restricted to our primitive brain. We don't have any other cognitive development enough to override that, to go big picture or to do more rational thinking and less egocentric thinking. So that as the first 7 years of life, we take everything personally, and we think we cause the treatment we receive, which is not possible. We reveal others, but we do not cause the treatment we receive. And so we're stuck with these first 7 years of restricted thinking and reasoning, which makes us, one, a really good learning machine, which is why school gets going, but it also makes us a trauma-making machine, because we can't look outside of the egocentricity and the narrow focus and the belief that we cause the treatment we receive. So it sets us up to accidentally misinterpret many events in our life, which creates these traumas, which creates this splintering of ourself. And so then we go hopefully into adulthood or later years of adolescence and adulthood, reclaiming the fragments and putting ourselves back together into wholeness.
Yeah, I like that aspect of, getting into it. And this is one of the questions I wanted to get into I'm going to keep using the jet plane metaphor. So let's say we're in a jet, a 747, a big jet, and it's got all these different specific distinguished parts of the plane. But then if we're put in front of a dashboard of a small engine plane, we don't have access to a lot of the things that we need access to fly that plane the way it was built to fly, that jet, the 747, because we're limited on that. So we also begin to see the world through the small plane lens, not the 747 lens that it was made originally for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if we have that going on, how does then that it kind of loops into itself, becomes a recursive loop? And I want to let people know that we're talking from probably a different level of understanding. You've also made this book very readable. I've sent the book and had the book, sent people to you to get the book to read as a kind of a meditation. You set this up as a meditation. I'll go back to where I was, but I just wanted to make clear that these thoughts and these ideas may be complicated, but trust me, John, the way John has written it in the book, you go through it, you have to kind of put it back to yourself to understand the concepts, which then you get a lot of, oh, I get it, aha. So we'll talk about a little bit, and we'll go back to that, about how you set this book up to read, not only for a therapist or a coach, but the layman as well, the person that might want to get some coaching or might want to learn this process and have it help them.
Yeah, thanks. What I thought of it as is being a journey essentially from the surface or even the external orientation of the primitive brain to a gradual search inside through the layers. I kind of likened it to an archaeological dig in search of the truth, so that we start with these outer layers of perception and misperception and beliefs, and then we go within ourselves past the original trauma into how does that collection of thinking processes and cognitive styles and perception lead to the traumas, and then we go underneath that to a place of, gosh, well, look what I've been doing to compensate for this perceived trauma. I don't need to do that anymore either. I see what I've been doing. So our consciousness increases and our self-awareness increases. And then we move to this place that I just call neutral, a place where we're able to observe and to recognize that we are not our choices, we are not our beliefs, we are not even the experiences we've had in our life. We are a separate being of grand awareness that allows us access to many more resources than we are aware of initially. And so we go through these layers to the place of what I call the one truth, where we are reconnected with and remembering, essentially, our original arrangement with Source, Creator, God, of our worthiness. But also in that place, we are able to receive much greater insight, much greater awareness, guidance, not just truth, but awareness of creative ways of moving through this life and of finding ways to express our true, genuine self in this life. Because in a way, that's what we came here to do, is express whatever gifts we were given, so that we are then free and unimpeded to express these by releasing the traumas and the illusions we've accumulated. So it's kind of a journey from outside self to inside self to our absolute center, where we are in union with Creator Source.
Yeah, that's great, and I noticed that myself too, since doing the work with you over the years, but also reading this book, and then I'm catching myself without going into the same behavior that I was doing before. That I'm at a choice point, that I can now have different choices about. I could go back into the primitive brain, or I could go back up into work with my higher self or the higher parts of the brain and my emotions and things. And that's one of the things that I really like about it, is that I'm not, when clearing this up, I find myself not as stuck in the viewpoint that I had before, the kind of the telescope that I'm looking at the world, or the facet of how I'm looking at the world. And I've been using this with clients. I've used your stuff a lot over the years, part of my toolkit. And recently, the idea of what's lost and bringing it back and using it with clients, and it's getting phenomenal results. Really, really big results.
Good to hear. And I think one of the threads that runs through this book is that it restores awareness of choice. And to me, that's awareness of choice is like the precipitating event that allows revolution, whether it's personal revolution or social revolution, whatever it may be. But when we are aware of choice, things change. Just awareness of choice creates options and freedom and new pathways for us.
So let's bring it down to the practical real quick. And in the book, there's a story. I think it was a guy named James at work. And maybe you can get an idea of how this, and the listeners can kind of maybe identify with something fairly close to it, or something closer, know somebody that is going through this. It was fascinating to read about how James and some of the stuff developed with him, and how, first off, you work and to clear up the issue with him. But what the issue clears up, so his response to it isn't there anymore. But at the same time, now he starts to look at things differently. So it's a 2-point effect that you get. It clears up the issue, the response that you're getting, or to the stimulus, and being able to clear that up. But then also, like you just were talking about, being able to filter and look through the world a little bit. So why don't you tell a little bit about James and help the listeners get a little bit from that.
Sure. So we'll do just sort of a brief historical kind of roots and then expression of and reactions to his own history. James grew up with a particularly critical mother. Now, in a family of origin, it could be father, mother, sibling, or it could even be somebody outside the family, like a teacher, that becomes sort of that person who we believe robs us of our self-worth. So in this case of James, he was raised by a particularly critical mother who led James to believe that he wasn't very competent. And so James worked very hard in school, got straight A's, and somehow it was just never enough for him to receive the accolades or the praise and approval from his mother. So he was going even into college, and he did exceptionally well in college, got a business degree and even an MBA, and he decided he wanted to be his own business owner. But the whole time he's going through this process, he's trying to compensate for the illusion that he's not competent. And so if he was competent, he would then regain his self-worth. So he's trying to get competence infused. And so he starts a business because, golly, I can do this and I know how. And boy, when I get this business going and it succeeds, I'll feel competent. So you can hear the egocentricity in there. It's all about him, not in a bad way, but in a way that just restricts him and is trying to compensate for something that was never really lost. So he sets up this business, and he has a great idea and a good business plan, and it starts going really, really well, and he's feeling really good about himself. But it expands so well that he needs to start hiring people to assist him. And because he still is trying to prove his competence, he ends up hiring people who are somewhat self-doubting, somewhat meek, hesitant, and therefore their competence is not quite what he needs. But because he's trying to prove his competence, he accidentally ends up hiring what you might consider to be his shadow. He hires the people he's trying not to be. But his ego set it up such that by hiring those kinds of people, he can therefore feel more competent because he's always having to tell them what to do and how to do it. He has to stay after them constantly because they never seem to quite get it right. So he gets to prove his competence, but in the process, it's draining him and it's taxing him, and business isn't going as well because these people aren't as skillful as he needs them to be because maybe they have other gifts, but it doesn't seem to fit well with his company. So he starts questioning himself again, and so his old nemesis of competence and therefore worth comes back into question, because we can never really get away from that, only briefly, but it will come back because the choices that are arranged by the primitive brain to solve the problem actually create more of the problem, and it puts us face to face with the issues. So we never really get to escape it as long as our primitive brain is devising the strategies to solve the illusion. It creates the problem all over again. So here's James again, faced with the feeling of being incompetent because business is declining. He's got all these people working with him that just don't seem to be very skillful. So in the process, he comes in to talk about these issues and his business problem and his frustration with people. But if we get past the primitive brain and the focus on how the business is doing and how his employees aren't doing, and go back inside self, he then starts to be able to identify that, yeah, I started with a place of feeling sort of at a deficit in my own sense of worth and competence. So we worked on going inside to find a place where he can connect with his inherent worth, his constant competence, you could say.
Yes.
And in the process, he could then let go of the things that were actually strangulating his business. They were choking it off because of his needs. So when he could get back in touch with his sense of self-worth, he was able to be free to run the business in a more creative and effective way. And then he actually found that his employees began to thrive more because he wasn't sort of micromanaging them and overseeing them in just too deliberate and too particular a manner. So everything started to flow better because he was coming from a place of sufficiency about his self-worth. And it changed how he felt about himself, which then just sort of naturally flowed out again from source or God to self to others. And it restored essentially the sacred sequence. And then he was able to be much more effective and successful in his business to where he could expand and even add different locations.
Yeah, that's a great story, John. Thanks for going through that. So,
sure. One
of the things that you had talked about in the book also that kind of goes in with this is that we have, it seems like the energy that we're expending trying to keep track of all this. I think you called them fragmented beliefs. What is it? Fragmented parts.
Yes.
And so you said we have a belief system that kind of goes with the fragmented parts, and we also have a belief system that goes with the whole of who we are, the wholeness there. And it seems like that the amount of beliefs that we, or the type of beliefs that we have, can also be triggering this to continue. Like you were just talking about with James, he had fragmented, and there's something outside the employees and what he was doing with the employees, and each one he's interacting with in a certain way, that the amount of energy expenditure and the types of things to try to focus on all at once had to be wearing him down. Whereas then you get him into the sacred sequence, and we start to get into the wholeness again. Is with James, his beliefs had to change as well from that, but also the sense of how he interacts with the parts, or the external thing of what we think the parts are, the people, let's say, his work.
Right. Beautiful. So when we get back in touch with Source, God, Creator, and restore the sacred sequence, for example, in James's case, he's no longer chasing competence, he is expressing competence.
Big,
right?
Yeah, that's huge.
And so then not only is he back in union with Source, Creator, and God, and self-worth, then that competence and that fear of being incompetent is restored in terms of his knowing he's competent, which restores and activates gifts that he already possesses to be able to display and apply his competence.
Yeah. So if he's exhibiting this, it seems like that from that place, that there's different types of logic going on. Like there's an unconscious and a conscious logic. So James consciously is saying, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to accomplish. And a lot of times we think, and I run into this a lot with clients and myself, is to say, well, I should be able to do this, And I tell people, I say, could you tie your shoes immediately? Were you able to know the alphabet and then spell and write paragraphs and write prose? Right. And no, it took you a while to get up to that place there. But they have an unconscious idea of how competent, or a conscious idea of how competent they are. But their unconscious, which is going to be the dominant part of the system, has a whole different way of thinking about this.
That's right. And so when a trauma happens and we splinter off that part of ourself, and again, I'll use assertiveness as the example because it's kind of convenient, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, is that if I can't allow myself to be assertive, then I have to be passive. And if I start trying to be assertive, there's that negative voice that's going to tell me it's not going to go well, they're going to dislike me, they're going to reject me. And it's actually our shadow that's trying to protect us from further harm and trauma. It says, don't go there because bad things happen, and it tries to undermine, or feels like it's trying to undermine, our confidence, but it's really trying to protect us, which is where we misinterpret the sort of the function or the role, and in a weird way, the gift of our shadow. It's a protector. And so when we recognize its real function and purpose, we can actually find it as an ally and then restore and reclaim that part of ourselves that we lost. But otherwise, we end up doing 3 and 4 times more work to try to figure out how to regain our worth if we use external sources, because we're chasing and making all these accommodations and adjustments, and we never really get there, and we end up wearing ourselves out trying to.
What a catch-22, huh? I mean, it's
absolutely.
It
absolutely
seems like we're in this state that we're out there trying to find something external to who we are to solve the problem. And we're running around like crazy in the amount of energy that it takes. And then you also have internal parts that are from the primitive brain that are working against us, telling us, oh, this is why it's not going to work. So then we're redoubling our efforts. You get the person that's saying, okay, they work hard, they're working 50 hours a week. Well, maybe if I work 60 hours a week, it'll be better, or 100 hours a week. And then they redouble the effort. But there are those parts then going, well, I'm going to keep you safe, so I'm going to have to put up a little bit more of a block or do something a little bit different to that.
Exactly. It's interesting how it sort of perpetuates the problem, and it doesn't ever actually examine the original belief that set it all in motion, because the ego self or primitive brain doesn't have reflective capacity to go inside and look at what's driving these choices. Why am I doing these things? It just says if a little bit of it worked some, then more should work better. And so it just keeps on trying to do more, because at some point there was a bit of a reward. So it just keeps pushing. And it won't give up because it believes sort of our survival is at stake. So it just keeps on going until we give up or drop or decide to finally change.
So you're saying basically then this is some of the childhood development stuff where patterns that we need as children to learn, where we focus on certain things, think everything is about me, centration is the focusing and ego what is it, egocentric, where we
egocentric and centration, and we personalize everything simply. We cause all these things that we don't.
Yeah, so if you can begin to understand, which John goes into the book, these central points, you're going to know what's working for you and what's working against you, and then how to make what's working against you or what you feel is working against you work more for you in that sense. It is really amazing when you get the understanding of it. It's almost as if you see it from a little bit of a distance and not take it so personally, to realize these are patterns that were put in us and evolved in whatever way or whatever you believe about evolution, that to save us and to get so we can learn, or learning machines and take this stuff on. But then if we don't mature in certain areas, or specifically when a trauma comes in, it can kind of isolate that and make that not grow with the rest of who we are and what we're about. Can you speak a little bit about that, John?
Absolutely. So when a trauma occurs, at both a neurological level and an emotional level, there's sort of an encapsulation in that of the event, and it is isolated from the rest of our own evolution as a person. So it never gets an update. It's sort of like the old story of how after World War II, 5 years later, they found a Japanese soldier up in the mountaintop of some Pacific Ocean island, and he was still in uniform, still had his gun, was ready to continue defending. He didn't have any idea the war was over. And so that part of us that gets traumatized gets encapsulated emotionally, but even at a neurological level, it is coded and cut off from the rest of our development. So it keeps trying to operate itself from its original point of view. And so it continues to what might be called sabotage us, because if we evolve too far, it feels that something bad's going to happen. So it does what might be considered self-sabotage. We get too close to being assertive, we get too close to being competent. If we believe we're not, then it has to undermine us and bring us back to a safe place. Even though it feels like it's sabotaging, in a weird way, it's actually keeping us safe from, because in its point of view, to assert myself is dangerous, so it can't let me.
Yeah, you talked about that in one of the beginning parts of the book, where in this vision, this dream that you had with the guy that was fighting in a war, and he had believed that the war was going on, and from the point of view inside the house, the war was, but everybody outside the house is going like, what are you, paranoid or something? There's nothing going on like that.
There's no war.
So you go in and kind of, and this is really what we do as therapists and coaches, is to go in and see what the reality of the world is of the client that we're working with, and begin from there. We don't want to resist it, because then we become a threat and we become part of the part more protective and shut down and get more compressed. Whereas if we go in and see it through and listening through their language and how they describe things, we know where they are, and then you meet them in a different area and a different point to help them get out of it. Yep.
And so it's joining with that person in their belief system and their world, even though we know that there's a misunderstanding at the root of it. We go in there and then we bring additional awareness, higher consciousness to it, and it then changes. But so we become the sort of the part or the person, the resource that brings the update to that encapsulated belief that has been impairing or impeding that person's own development.
Yeah. Along those lines, I want to ask you, there's something in the book you said that, and it really got me, and I think a lot of people will identify with this. You said something to the effect of, taking action means possible failure. Does this failure negate any gains we might have felt we had? So maybe if you talk a little bit about, because I think we all know that it's almost like a procrastination, and we wonder, why are we procrastinating this? I know how to do it. I've done it before, and I do it, but there's something that's stopping me. And it's almost like the sense of reading about the idea of, if I'm going to take action on this, there's something about failure and what failure means to us and how we go into the protective mode again on that.
Right. And so I like to think of failure as a time-based misconception. If we take a chunk out of time and we say, in this period of time, I didn't succeed at what I was attempting. We call it failure. But it negates the rest of available time. Time goes on and on and on and on. So if I didn't succeed at the first time, then I've got multiple opportunities to continue learning, developing new strategies, developing new skills, and go about succeeding at something. And so if we weed out egocentricity, then failure is really just feedback, as NLP talks about. It's really just learning that what do I need to tweak or change or alter about how I'm going about doing this so that I'm focused on the task and the project, not me. And so failure isn't failure, it's learning.
Yes, it is learning in that. So one of the things that we're going to talk about, and one of the reasons we're doing this interview is, again, to introduce people to the sacred sequence, remembering the one truth. And on your website, you're selling this. Let me just go to, let's see how there's John's website right there. So you're selling the book on your website. How much are you selling this book for, John?
It is $10.95, and then shipping is $3.
It's $10.95 plus $3 shipping for this amazing book that I guarantee if you just sit there and just consider it as a meditation and go through and read the book, it'll change your life. It'll change your life, and it'll give you a much deeper understanding of who you are and who you're not. A lot of the times we identify with who we think we are, and it's really just a process or a pattern that's in us. One of the things I talk to people about a lot is, okay, I'll say to a client, do you do this? Yes. Does your brother do this? Yes, to a certain degree. Does everybody you know do this to a certain degree? Absolutely. And then I say, is it yours?
Right.
It can't be yours. It's got to be something else. It's got to be a process, or it's got to be a pattern that's going on inside of you. And then, and this is one of the things where with the childhood development stuff that was so big to me is that I could see this as being like, wow, this is not me. This is just something I do. Something I'm doing.
Separates.
Can you talk a little bit about that, John?
Sure. I think that's really great. The primitive brain creates an identity out of everything we do. And it says that's who we are, not what we do. And when we raise our consciousness to a degree, we then find that that's what I do, but it's one of countless possibilities. So it's not who I am, it's what I do. And then it allows, again, freedom to choose, I'm going to do something different this time. And I'm going to do something different the next time, even from that. So that it restores that wide range of options when we don't create an identity, because ego self wants to attach to everything. You know, like I am my shirt. No, it's what I'm wearing. And so the chef is not the meal, all that kind of good, those wonderful examples that remind us that what we do, what we say is not who we are. It's just what we're using at the moment. The shoes I'm wearing are not who I am. And so we find that when we can separate out, and the higher we go in consciousness, the closer we get to that place of union with Source or God, the more we realize there's no such thing as identity, because truly at that highest level of awareness, there's no such thing as a self. There's just awareness. And in pure awareness, judgment is impossible. Everything just is. Yes. And so we're free to use anything we want without repercussions. If it didn't work, we'll try something else. But we are completely a safe distance away from what we're doing and the outcome of what we do, because we're just really pure awareness.
So from that state of pure awareness, this is maybe you can give us some examples of this work that you've done over the years, and how some of the people that you've helped, some of the things that they say and they start to talk from. I tell you personally, is, I've been studying, again, the NLP, doing the work with people over 30 years in the spirituality, but something about your book really put this together like it's never been put together before, and to help to know what we are, and we're pure potential in the sense of when I don't have to pay attention and put my awareness on these identities or these parts or these processes that are going on, and I can come from this place. I'm not out searching for something outside of me. I'm able to then give to the world something different. And this is what your book is abundantly clear, and what the sacred sequence is about is living from this place.
Exactly.
Maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Sure. So what we do is restore the sort of natural flow or natural order so that it comes from source into us and then out to others, as opposed to trying to have an inflow of a sort from others to self and then somehow convert that into, geez, am I good enough now to receive accolades or approval from God or source? It's like we reverse the whole process at the primitive brain level. And so when we raise our consciousness, we get a completely different view of how the flow of energy operates. Not that we don't receive from others, we do, but we don't act in order to receive. We act in order to distribute from source. And in that process, we then eliminate ourselves as being not only a source of what we're distributing, but we are not gaining or losing worth as a result of this. We're just being a conduit, you could say. And so in the process of doing that, we are much more free to do whatever we choose, because failure isn't really part of the description. It's we planted a bunch of seeds and we assisted others in their gardening or whatever it may be, but the outcome is not the focus, it's the process. Did I share what I know to be true? Did I do what I know was in union with or from union with Creator Source, so that it becomes just an expression of and a distribution of that highest awareness, which then eliminates risk, you could say, because if it works, great. If it doesn't, it's all the same, because everybody's equally worthy anyway from the start.
Yeah, that's powerful. As you were talking, I was thinking, and I'm looking, and I've got a $2 bill here. And
oh, cool.
I was thinking, okay, so if we're seeing this from the whole self, pure potentiality and awareness of who we are, and then we have a trauma, we kind of drop into the primitive brain, and the whole map, everything, the picture changes. But
yes.
Then when you start to come from, using the sacred sequence, and you start to come back from, who we really are, all of a sudden we go back to this. And if I'm here, the viewers on the screen, I can see it, but you can't, you're not able to work from the backside of the image because it's not in your awareness, and that the wholeness of who you are continues to fill up your awareness, and you just work from there, and this stuff isn't even in existence.
That's right.
Is that making sense to you? Does that model fit into what you're saying?
Absolutely. Nice example. So that, yes, even though we operate ideally from that higher consciousness and that sense of unity, the primitive brain continues existing, but we just don't use it because we override it. We recognize that it has a reflex element to it because it's sort of our survival. And sometimes it can actually turn into sort of what amounts to an emotional autoimmune disorder. If our primitive brain gets too active, then we become really self-condemning, and a lot of critical self-talk happens. And to me, that's sort of an emotional or auditory version of an autoimmune disorder where the self attacks the self.
Yeah.
So
that's real powerful. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I'm sure everybody here on the call has somebody that they know, or maybe somebody they know personally or themselves, where if you're turning off all these chemicals, cortisol and different things, adrenaline that run through your body based on the primitive brain, it's not only not healthy for how you enjoy life and how you live life, but it's not very healthy for your body either, is it?
That's right. It will turn into all kinds of physical ailments, from intestinal issues to headaches to heart issues, blood pressure issues, all kinds of joint issues. It becomes it sets in motion our overreactive, our autoimmune system. And so we end up with these symptoms and ailments that are in some ways limiting. So when we're in that primitive brain, it starts doing a self-criticism because it's a perfectionist, but it also doesn't know how to be perfect. And more importantly, it doesn't realize that perfection pre-exists. Perfection pre-exists all action. So that it tries to create something that already exists, but it doesn't understand that because it has no capacity for a bigger picture. So it's trying to do something that already exists, and in the process, because it can't quite be quote-unquote perfect, then it starts attacking self for being something less than competent again, and then that becomes sort of like a verbal autoimmune disorder of self-attacking self. And in the process, it diminishes our abilities because there's that inner critic that's just in our ear going like that all the time. Exactly. And telling us we're not able, when really, again, that's sort of our shadow self that's trying to keep us safe. Because if I'm going to be assertive or competent, what if, based on its perspective, what if I don't succeed, or what if I do? I might get chastised, I might get rejected and judged. And so it sets us up to be fearful of success, because that could bring judgment, criticism, and rejection. So it's saying, don't do that, you're not able, don't do that, because it's actually afraid of reaching that next level of achievement and accomplishment.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, what I was just saying, where you take an action, that when you take action, it could be failure, it could be problems, and so then the primitive brain is set up to keep you away from anything that may harm or hurt you. But in a sense, it doesn't see. But the one thing you said is about the idea is that we search for perfection, and yet we already have it. That catch-22. I mean, that seems to be the critical point, the brunt, the focus of spirituality, of the therapy work that we're doing, the coaching, the work doing. How do we go about seeking perfection? And because, like with the $2 bill that I was showing here just a second ago, when we already are perfect, and we're trying to find that picture on this picture, it's not available because we don't have a big enough viewpoint of it's very critical. What you were saying is that we don't have that big enough viewpoint, big picture, to see this perfection right here from the primitive brain. And so we go through all these semantics, but we're never going to get there because it's not there and it already exists.
Exactly. And so primitive brain not only doesn't understand, but it lacks the ability to ever understand, which is why we have to raise consciousness to get above that level of reasoning of the primitive brain, because you cannot win an argument with a survivally based mechanism, because it thinks to lose is to die. So you have to raise your consciousness to get above it so that you can then recognize that everything already is perfect. It's shocking. Everything is already perfect. As I look out my window, I see dozens of trees. And each one is a perfect tree, even though each tree is different. Some are arrow straight, some have one bend in them, some have multiple crooks and bends, and yet they're each a perfect tree. And so perfection exists in every form, constantly, and already exists. We cannot improve upon perfection, and we don't need to. When we're in that higher consciousness, we recognize that we can just be in an effortless state of being and recognize that their perfection is existing right there.
Yeah. And I think that the sense is that probably most of the listeners or viewers will know that. They look and they say, wow, it's all perfect. But yet there's something missing, and I'm pointing towards my chest, inside of them. And tell us what happens. And I started to ask you this earlier about maybe some of the clients that you'd work with.
Sure.
When we can have that realization of the perfection that is outside of us, and then hook that up with the perfection, knowing that same perfection outside of us is inside of us, and then begins to flow out. When those two match up and connect, what happens?
Yeah, that's when some really amazing changes happen for the better. Example of a client I saw earlier this week, actually, who was very uncomfortable with sort of stating her piece, speaking her piece, standing her ground, and being assertive, because sometimes people would react in adverse ways. They would try to talk her out of it. They would claim that hurt their feelings. They would do things to try to talk her out of taking a stand. And so she would take responsibility for that and feel like she was actually causing them to have hurt feelings. And so when we raised consciousness and got to a higher perspective, she could recognize that, well, that's actually them revealing their needs, and in some ways revealing their misunderstandings and misconceptions. It's not her creating that, it's her revealing that. And that was a really eye-opening event for her to realize that she was glimpsing inside them, because their behavior and actions reveal them, but they don't tell her anything about herself. And so she was able to set herself free from the belief that she was causing that. And so in that place, then she was able to feel comfortable with setting boundaries as a form of self-protection in a healthy kind of way. Setting boundaries as a way of honoring herself instead of honoring others. And it wasn't even honoring others, because they were in some ways being self-serving. So it allowed her to gain freedom from her misconceptions so that she could comfortably, and in some ways actually joyfully, set boundaries with others. And it freed her up to sort of establish and recognize even that there are naturally existing boundaries between ourselves and others. At a higher level of consciousness, we see that they already exist. And then when you get to that higher consciousness, you recognize, my gosh, there's already lines there of a sort that are those boundaries about what's healthy for us and what's healthy for others and healthy in our interaction with others. So when she was able to get that higher place, she no longer had the anxiety about speaking her mind. She no longer had the sadness or even the guilt about other people's reactions. She was free to be herself and know that by being clear and concise and living from integrity, she was actually helping everyone, including self.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And you reminded me as you were saying that, another great reframe that you had in the book is to say that these things that we identified as issues, as problems, and things we did our best to try to get away from using the primitive brain, that the reframe was these are now doorways to tell us how to get back.
Yes, that's the thing I really have come to realize as I kept doing sort of research, and much gratitude to my clients who have allowed me to work with them and in the process taught me many things about human nature, is I realized that there are two forms of love. One is direct, where it's joyful and loving and pleasant and upbeat, and we all feel great about it. And then the other form of love starts as a negative coding, but it's not actually negative. It just needs to be translated and understood that it's a doorway, as you say, into reclaiming part of ourselves. So when that negative voice is over here talking in our ear saying, you can't do this, you're not able, it's actually revealing a rich opportunity to reclaim a part of ourself that is very devoted to us. This part over here that's telling us and doing the self-criticism, it's a servant to us in a way. It's very devoted and dedicated to us, our safety, and our well-being. But because it's operating from the old original point of the trauma, it doesn't understand how it can serve us better. So it's still trying to keep us protected in a very primitive manner of don't speak your mind, don't take that action because something bad will happen. But it's so devoted, and when we can get in touch with that at a deeper level, we recognize it possesses that same source, that same God energy at its core. And then when we connect with that and recognize how it really loves us just as much as we love it, it transforms and restores it to its original nature, which allows us access to the gifts that it came with.
That was sweet, John. That was really powerful. I think that, that the sense of, being able to hear those voices and the reframe of it, that they are there as servants. They are there to care about us, that we've just interpreted it wrongly. And when we start to now approach them and go, oh no, there's that voice again, even if we don't even know we're doing it unconsciously, there's a resistance. Well, why am I feeling like this? Well, because you're resisting that voice. But now to approach that voice, knowing that part now knows that we understand who it really is, and we become curious and interested in how that's going to help us in the journey we can take together, that all of a sudden there's a relaxation because we're welcoming it instead of resisting it, trying to push it out the door. There's a whole different dynamic that goes on from the beginning.
It's transformative when that happens. When we, instead of getting angry and rejecting it, we actually express love to it because we know it resides at its core. It begins that transformation process. It's just a remarkable thing that once we genuinely connect with the love that's at its center, it naturally evolves without us having to consciously steer it or direct it into a different form. It returns and restores it to its original form.
Yeah, and we've never really understood what its possibilities are because we've limited it within a certain category of resistance. And then when we put it into the idea of this can be part of who we are and the abundance and the possibilities, we discover it has new talents and it can take us in a whole different direction and work for us. And now, instead of, when people talk about it feels like I'm carrying, different clients I work with, it feels like I've got a ball and chain I'm carrying, or I've run into a wall, or I've got something heavy on my back. Well, once you shift that around and flip that around, those are they're no longer feelings that it's coming in to resist you as a weight or something heavy on you. It actually lifts you. It's no longer a burden. Now they're aimed and directed towards helping us and bringing us our purpose and just making life so much easier.
Goes from a felt enemy to an actual ally.
Yes, exactly. An ally that's there to help us. But one of the things that you talk about a lot, and I want to say, is because I really understood this with Equilibrium, your book Equilibrium, was the idea between passive and aggressive, that they're kind of either or states. Either I have to be passive or I have to be aggressive. And then you talk about assertiveness. And when I understood assertiveness, it wasn't just about, the passive and aggressive. It was a continuum that I could use in many different levels a little bit. So when you talk throughout this, you've mentioned assertiveness. Maybe you could talk a little bit about passive aggressive and assertive and what that means to us.
Okay, certainly. If we think of a scale from 1 to 9, with 1 being extreme passivity and 9 being extreme aggressiveness. And so on the first part of the scale where 1 is passive, if you take 1, 2, and 3, those are sort of degrees of passivity. Take 4, 5, and 6, those are sort of mid-range assertiveness.
Yes.
And then 7, 8, and 9 are what would be called aggressive. So if when we're, say, 5 or 6 years old and we try to be assertive and we step into, say, a 4 or a 5 on that scale, and mother, father, or somebody rejects us or gets angry and infuriated with us, and then we shrink back to a 1 or a 2 or a 3, because 4 becomes dangerous and we're literally feeling like our life's in jeopardy. So we're restricted to 1, 2, or 3. Now, the other scenario happens sometimes where the child will escalate. Instead of a 4 or a 5, they'll go up to a 7 or an 8, and then the parent backs down.
Yes.
Then they become that person who stays in a 7 or 8, because even regular assertiveness at a 4, 5, or 6, they consider now to be passive and dangerous.
Interesting.
Whereas the person who backed down to a 1, 2, or a 3 as their coping strategy now considers a 4 to be aggressive, when it's really just ordinary. And then periodically what happens is, if you're only living at a 1, 2, or a 3, life happens, and you can only hold so much behind the dam, and eventually they explode and they go to an 8. And then they go, oh, crap, I've really done it now. I've been a horrible person. Now I can only be a 1 or a 2. I've got to be even more compliant and cooperative because I'm dangerous. And so it creates this repeating loop of an impossible arrangement that cannot possibly succeed in terms of self-expression and assertiveness and kind of self-directedness.
That's amazing stuff, John. And speaking directly to the viewers, you can kind of get an understanding why, when I first met John in the early 2000s, it might even have been 2000, why I latched on to this, and I've been studying under John for all these years and developed a friendship with him, and he's been a mentor to me, and he's been a coach and a therapist. It's just an amazing man with such amazing talents and gifts for the world. You can see why I've brought him to you today to show you a little bit of who he is. In this book, you have to get this book. I mean, what is it? $10.95 plus $3 for shipping, John. And also, we had talked about a product that we did back in the early 2000s called Total and Permanent Freedom in 3 Easy Steps. You're getting that as a bonus. So not only do we get the book for $10.95 plus the shipping, you're going to get a free download that is a conversation where I talk to you about the 3 different steps. One of them being flexibility, I remember that, and patience, flexibility, and foresight, and how you go into that. And that's also part of the sacred sequence. But then you give a little bit of a hypnotic induction to take people through a meditation and a relaxation. So you're going to include this. If they buy the book, you'll send them in an email a link to this download.
Absolutely. That'll be great. I look forward to sharing both.
Yep. And so John, I want to thank you for the time that you spent. I know we went over time. We talked about an hour. We're at about an hour and 10, 15 minutes right now. Yeah. So thank you so much for giving from your heart. And
thank you, Mark. My pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks for learning all this stuff to be able to teach us this and to be able
to share.
Yeah. And so I highly recommend to the listeners, get this book. Dr. Burton is going to be doing some seminar. Get on his list. You get on his book. You could probably email him and say, keep me on your list and let me know when another seminar is coming up. And, you can buy his other books on Amazon. And can they buy them from you too, John?
I've sold out the other books, so I still do have the Sacred Sequence book available through me. The other ones will need to be through Amazon. Through Amazon,
okay. But they buy the Sacred Sequence through you, and then they get the Total and Permanent Freedom in 3 Easy Steps, which is our talk along with a hypnotic journey that you take them through to help install the 3 easy steps, which is
Yeah.
patience, flexibility, and what was the third word again?
Foresight.
Mm-hmm. So, John, it's been a pleasure as always is. And I look forward again to talking to you again soon and getting together and coming down and doing a seminar and maybe doing some filming and creating some new products together.
That would be great.
John has been instrumental in helping me with different products. Some of my products, you probably recognize his name from the products, where he's helped me with his wonderful metaphors and ideas. But I'm sure you know through this conversation, he's been a thread and an influence through my life, and professionally and personally. And thank you so much for it. And thanks for the time, John. And
thank you, Mark. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. We'll get this link out to everybody in this video for them to watch, and then just be prepared for in your email to see what you get, John. And once you stand by, will I just say goodbye, and I'll be right back with you. So thanks everybody for listening. I hope you understand the gift. I would recommend you go through and listen to this several times. And if you get the book and you listen into the free audio that comes with it, John has some other products, like I said, other books. He's also got Stories to Remember, which is an amazing CD with some awesome stories that are therapeutic stories that help you. Just listen to them over and over. But listen to this again. Contact John if you're interested in some of his seminars. We'll put in the final edit here, I'll put his email. It's probably up right now, so you can write him directly. So once again, thanks everybody. Dr. John Burton, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks.